Hey everybody, welcome to the first day of pediatric nursing. Today we're going to talk about chapters 1 through 3. I hope you had time to skim over the chapter first. What I want you to do is just skim the chapter, pay attention to the topics, review the charts, the tables, the graphs, things like that. Then I want you to listen to the recording with your printed PowerPoint in front of you and take notes as I talk. Don't just study the pictures on the PowerPoint. You need to listen and take notes. And then after that, I want you to go back over your chapters, highlighting and taking notes of specific areas that I talk about and read specific sections that I talk about. Anything that is related to something that I talked about, you need to read in the book. If it's something that I did not touch on, it is not going to be on the test. So the first thing I want to point out is the difference in patient-centered care versus family-centered care. Why do we say family-centered care? So when we talk about pediatrics, how are you going to bond with a child if you can't first bond with the family? How is the child going to learn to trust you and accept you as their caregiver if their parents don't accept you or whoever their caregiver may be? They can sense that. If a dog or a cat or a horse can sense trust issues and anxiety issues, can't a child sense the same sort of thing? Of course they can. So we cannot develop trust with the child alone, considering the constant, most important aspect of the child's life is their family. Page 4 talks about development of family-centered child care. Please pay attention to that section. And I want to read this little statement and just try to get you riled up. This is from the Pediatric Nursing Journal in 2015. More than 2 decades ago, that'd be 20 years ago, the principles of family-centered care were first espoused in pediatrics. Since that time, those principles have been extended to the care of patients of all ages in all settings. There is growing recognition of the important role that families play as members of care teams, enhancing quality of care and safety for children, adults, and the elderly. Well, it's nice that in America in 2015, we had someone write a scholarly article that was peer-reviewed and well accepted by the medical community that pointed out the fact that people need their families when they're sick, when they're dying. They need their families. I have no words that this should be a topic of an article in a journal. It seems like it's common sense. It seems like it's basic humanity. But then I think back on the reason why this is necessary to point out, and it's our own fault. As you go through clinical and maybe through your life experiences, you may come to see, or you may have already seen, differences in the way nurses on an adult floor respond to families compared to the way nurses on a pediatric floor or a neonatal unit would respond to families. I guess it is expected in the pediatric world to act a certain way with families, and it's overlooked if the same expectations are not met on an adult floor, and it shouldn't be that way. And I hope if there's one thing that you take away from this class, it is that you will not be that nurse. You take your pediatric knowledge as far as what you learned about communication and relationships among caregivers and the nursing staff. I hope you take that into your adult nursing rotations, and you remember that whether they're 9 years old or they're 89 years old, they deserve to have somebody caring, kind, and compassionate advocate for them and care for them. And you cannot do that without showing the same towards their family. Something else to think about with pediatrics is socioeconomics. So not all children have the same access to care. Access to care, it isn't there. People live in rural settings and they don't have any money. They don't have vehicles. They don't have dependable vehicles or dependable rides. They live in the inner city and they don't have money. They don't have cars. They don't have dependable rides, whether it's money for the bus or depending on the bus and having all of these children to take you to the clinic, and how long might you be there, and just all of the headaches that people have to deal with on a day-to-day basis when they're poor. If you are sitting, I used to say, if you are sitting in this class today, I want you to look around and recognize that you are the minority. You are the privileged minority. So if you came here thinking that your white teacher was privileged and I was what is it that everyone's saying, white privilege and all of that, let me tell you, every single one of you are white privileged right now. If you have the ability to sit at home on your laptop or your computer or your cell phone and listen to what I'm talking about, and you paid your tuition or whatever it may be, you had a ride to get to school or a ride to get to clinical, let me tell you, you are blessed. And there are things that we take for granted that a lot of people that they couldn't even imagine. And when I say a lot of people, guys, I mean, we just close our eyes to it. We just look the other way when we watch the news and say, oh, I'm glad I don't live in that neighborhood. This stuff that happens every day. There are children and babies and teenagers that are just embedded in it. And this is their life, sun up to sundown. And you're going to get to take care of some of those kids in clinical. And when you're a nurse, whether you work in the operating room, the emergency room, the GI lab, you're going to run across kids. So don't think that you're not going to be a pediatric nurse because you can't handle it. So instead, you're going to work in one of these other places. Kids are everywhere. From the time they're born to the time they're 19 years old, 20 years old, you got families to deal with, and you've got pediatric issues. You can't hide from it. And if you're going to embrace it, you need to embrace it right. And the number one rule in being a pediatric nurse is don't be that nurse. You be better. You go above and beyond for your patient, and you recognize the blessings that you have, and you don't take them for granted, and you give to others. You recognize we're not judging people for being poor. We're opening our eyes to the blindness, and we're recognizing where there is a need so that we can fill it. How can we help if we don't recognize that there's a problem and that there's a gap? I'll quit preaching for a minute. Page 7 talks about access to care and the efforts that are being made to develop the public health insurance programs and get people in poor families insurance. But if you look at the last paragraph on page 7, you see that even with these programs in place, there are children with unmet medical needs. They have delayed medical care. They do not have a usual primary care provider because they see someone different every time they go. And they end up being in the emergency room way more than they should be just because they don't know where else to go. And what do the nurses do? What do? We talk crap about them for coming to the emergency room for such a minor problem. Well, there's a reason. Also, keep in mind that Medicaid is not accepted by many dentists. For that reason, there are many oral health issues among the pediatric population. I've seen children with abscesses. They're losing teeth. The health care is terrible. But I was unaware that there were so many dentists that did not take Medicaid. So if you stare at this picture for a minute, FPL stands for Federal Poverty Level, and this chart is looking at children who are below that federal poverty level, broken down by age, non-Hispanic whites, non-Hispanic blacks, and Hispanics. The number of children 12 to 17 that are above the poverty level is significant. And then if you go down to Hispanics and you compare the children that do not have health insurance coverage that are Hispanic with non-Hispanics, you can see that it is doubled. So this is a representation of children by race and by age that have health insurance coverage. In Louisiana, we have a program called WIC that many of our patients rely on for nutrition. So a mama gets so many cans of powdered formula for her baby, maybe her baby and her toddler, or however many children she needs it for, and that has to last. So say the can of formula gets knocked over by the 4-year-old and half of the powder spills out on the floor. How is she going to make that powder last? How are we going to stretch that and make it last until the next supply comes through? Well, one way that some mothers think of is to dilute that formula a little more than the directions say to dilute it. You know, the baby won't know. It'll fill the belly. But what can happen when you do that? What happens when we dilute our formula? Do babies need water? Like a separate bottle of water? Or do they get all the water that they need in their formula? They get all that they need in their formula. So when you start giving them more water than they need by over diluting the formula, you end up with dilutional hyponatremia, and the infant will develop seizures, and it can kill them. We took care of the baby in the PICU that came in through the emergency room with seizures, unresponsive to medications. Eventually had to intubate the child because they had given so many drugs trying to stop the seizures. Thinking, what in the world is going on? Is fixing to rush them to CT? Did we have a brain tumor, an injury? And then the labs came back and the sodium was 118. And the question started being asked to the mother, and she stated that she was having to stretch the formula. Of course, they had to ask specific questions because the providers knew, you know, is this a case of when I saw the sodium of 118, is this a case of diluting the formula? Because we recognize that it can cause this. So we have to carefully ask the questions to the parent so that they'll be honest and tell the truth. They weren't trying to murder the child, most likely. They were trying to make it until the next time they could get more formula. So sure enough, the mother had been trying to stretch the formula to make it last and unknowingly almost killed her baby. Healthy Start is another program. The goal of Healthy Start is to reduce infant morbidity and mortality, and there's different things that are available to families through that program, and our role is to reach out and educate ourselves, number one, on the types of programs that are available, and then educate others on how to get in touch with these programs and let them know what assistance can be provided. This information is from the Louisiana Department of Health 2014-2016 report. Every year in Louisiana, an average of 64,000 infants are born. Of these infants, about 500 die before their first birthday, and another 230 do not survive till their 15th birthday. 700 kids. Yes, out of 64,000, but really, do we need to lose 700 children before their 15th birthday? Do we need to lose 500 before their first birthday? This isn't, 1750, this is 2020. During this time, 2,208 children died between those 2 years. 2014 to 16, and 717 of those deaths were due to injury. So that's almost 1,000 of those children died due to injury. How do we prevent deaths due to injury? All we can do is educate. Does it mean that we only need to educate the parents? Heck no. We need to be out talking to teenagers. We need to be in the middle schools talking to kids and pre-teenagers. We need to talk to teenagers in a way where it sticks. We can have do different kinds of presentations. I believe the most effective kinds that stick are when you have, somebody that comes in a wheelchair and talks to the kids about, drinking and driving based on life experience, or swimming drunk and diving into a swimming pool and end up with a broken neck. And when you hear those kinds of testimonies, it sticks. But I guarantee you that parents can only control their children to a certain degree. And if teenagers want to be stupid and get themselves killed, then they will, no matter what the parents say. So we have to reach out to the adolescent population as a whole separate entity in order to educate. So we're losing way too many kids in Louisiana. For the same time period, Louisiana had the 4th highest rate of infant mortality in the United States. 4th highest rate of infant mortality in the United States between 2014 and 2016. If you notice on page 9, there's an international infant mortality section. As far as prematurity and infants dying due to prematurity, our rates are better. But once we talk about full-term infants or 37 weeks and up, the United States has one of the highest mortality rates. We also, Louisiana, has the 3rd highest rate of child mortality between the ages of 5 to 9. So Louisiana ranks number 4 for dead babies and number 3 for dead children. Internationally, we have one of the highest infant mortality rate. the section of Louisiana that we are in, we are Region 7. If we were face-to-face, today we would have a guest speaker. Shelley Ryan Gray is the Maternal Child Health Director for Region 7, and she reviews every child death that occurs in our region. She attends the scene for many of those. She's in charge of all the maternal child education going out through the public health department. And she is a wealth of information, and we appreciate her coming to talk to our class. And I'm working with her to try to set something up virtually, but I just don't have that in place yet. This information on the slide here shows us where Region 7 had, during that 2014-2016 timeframe, 71 infant deaths, and the mortality rate of infants per 1,000 live births was 9.5. So the average annual infant death counts for Region 7, I can't remember how many parishes are in Region 7, but it's just basically our northwest corner of Louisiana. There were 71 infant deaths. If we look here, our red represents African American, blue is all races, and green is white. On the side, we have the infant mortality rate per 1,000 births, and here we have the decades. So you can see, compared to 1950, taking it all the way to 2007, across the spectrum, infant mortality rates are decreasing, but still there is a disparity between African American infants and white infants. There's too many African American babies that are dying in proportion to non-African American babies. Why is that? We have to look at that if we're going to make it better. We have to figure out what the problem is. Why does that disparity exist? We can't say, well, I'm glad it's not my problem. It is our problem. And we've got to talk about it so that we can fix it. From 2014 to 2016, Louisiana had the highest rate of mortality for children ages 1 to 14 in the United States, as well as the highest rate of mortality in children ages 1 to 4. Every year in Louisiana, an average of 232 children between 1 and 14 years old die. That's just blows me away. Here's the point. You want to be a nurse in Louisiana, in Region 7? This is what you get to do. This is what you're walking into. So I'm not trying to depress you. I'm trying to open your eyes. You may not have been personally touched by one of the 232 children that died, but I bet you know somebody who was. And your chances of running across one of these cases in the near future has exponentially increased since you enrolled in this program. My job is to educate you and inspire you to be an effective educator, an advocate for your patient and for their families, so that we can change these numbers one family at a time. This graph shows the United States versus Louisiana. Louisiana rate of child deaths, 26.8 compared to 16.4 over with the United States. This shows you how Louisiana is almost double, has almost double the rate of child deaths compared to the overall United States rate. If if Louisiana had the same mortality rate as the United States, 90 fewer children would die per year. 90. How many family members did those 90 children touch? How many people were impacted by the death of the one child? And then again, here we have them broken down by region. And we see that in region 7, the mortality rate was 30.5. So we talked earlier about the number of children that die from injuries. Here you can see that unintentional injury is the leading cause of death in children, especially in children 1 to 19 years of age. And in Louisiana, about half, or 49%, of childhood deaths between the ages of 1 to 14 are due to injury, and most of those deaths were considered preventable. Now, unintentional injury could be, especially if it's preventable, could be things like a car accident. It could, maybe they didn't have a seatbelt on. It could be an ATV accident, a bicycle accident, a drowning accident, a skateboarding accident. There's a variety of unintentional injuries. The only injury that would be considered unintentional would be murder or suicide. And then you can see other causes of pediatric deaths ages 1 to 14 in Louisiana during those years. Each year, an average of 39 children die in a motor vehicle crash. 24 children die from drowning. 19 die from homicide. 11 from some other accidental cause, including a fall or other accident. 9 children die due to fire. 7 from suicide. And 5 due to threats to breathing. This is, again, from that Louisiana report, 2014 to 2016. So you can see that the majority of deaths were motor vehicle crashes. Then you have homicides, drownings. Can we prevent drownings? Can we prevent deaths from motor vehicle crashes? Can we prevent homicides? Can we prevent suicides? There's so much we can do that we can try. So many things we can try. As far as motor vehicle crashes, since that was number 1, let's talk about that. Infants and children ages 5 to 14 are more likely to die as passengers in motor vehicles, okay? If they're going to die from a car wreck, they died because they're inside the car. When we talk about kids less than 4, if they die related to a motor vehicle, it's usually because they were playing behind the car and they got ran over. So, because they're small and The person doesn't know they're back there and they don't see them. So this shows you ages 0 to 1, they can't walk yet. So they're not rolling around on the ground behind the car. If they die, they were most of the time improperly restrained inside the vehicle. They were being held, they weren't buckled in their car seat, they were just sitting in their car seat. Variety of, you'd be amazed at how people can find ways to use a car seat without using it correctly. Ages 1 to 4, most of them were outside of the vehicle at the time of injury. And then you can see that by the time they get to the 10 to 14 range, they were usually inside the vehicle. Of children who died while riding inside the vehicle at the time of the crash, 50% were not using their lap belt, and over 40% were not using the shoulder belt. And then you can see that many were also missing their booster seat. Some didn't have a child seat at all. And many vehicles did not have an airbag or a properly working airbag. When it comes to drowning, drowning was the second most common cause of unexpected death in children in Louisiana. Most drowning deaths occur among children who are white, male, and between the ages of 1 and 4. Of the deaths that happened in Louisiana, 44% of those, it was determined that there were no barriers to the water, such as a fence, a gate, something like that around a pool, or the children were not supervised. 44% of the deaths, the children were not supervised. Only 8% was the child or parent impaired. These are usually just terrible accidents, and the child gets away and is briefly unsupervised, or, just maybe the parent thought they were supervising the child and thought the back door was locked and they couldn't get out, and parent fell asleep or went to take a bath, and when they came out, the child had escaped. And I think that's where the male and 1 to 4 years comes into play, because they're just curious. There is a website that we can share to to download educational resources to prevent drownings. For some more statistics, 53% of those drownings in Louisiana did occur in a pool or hot tub area. Only 8% were in lakes, 8% were in canals, 8% were in bathtubs. I'm wondering what that 20% is. Maybe that's the river. I really don't know what that is. But the point is, 53% were in swimming pools. Sadly, we have to put the number 3 cause of pediatric deaths in Louisiana as homicide. Ages 1 to 14, firearms were the leading method of child homicide. 44% of those deaths were from a gun, as well as firearms are the leading cause of all weapons-related deaths in children. Other causes of death were 17%, as far as homicides, 17% were by knife or a blunt object, maybe hit by a car on purpose. 14% were listed as physical force. So this would be a situation of beating the child to death, and that would include shaken baby syndrome. And then 8% were from things such as neglect, malnutrition, maltreatment. I mean, it's just sickening to think that these things are happening in our backyard. When I dropped my daughter off at a friend's house the other day, I said, "This is where y'all were walking down this street?" "Yeah, right down there. We to so and so's house, that house at the end of the street." And I said, "Well, who lives in that house?" "Oh, I don't know." And this was a decent neighborhood, brick houses, everything looked normal. And I said, "Well, you have no idea who lives there. You have no idea what could be going on behind that door and behind those windows and those closed curtains." Said, "Remember that movie we watched and on the ID channel, that show we watched about how many years those kidnapped girls lived in that house, and the neighbors were oblivious and they couldn't escape." And just last week, was it, the little boy, 14-year-old little boy, escaped, and he had been locked in his room since March in Bossier. I'm pretty sure it was in Bossier. You don't know what's going on behind closed doors in these houses, and I guarantee you that you would be surprised by some of it. My children think they're so abused. I just want to knock them upside the head and tell them, you don't know how lucky you are. The most common type of firearm used was a handgun. The most frequently known owner of the firearm was a parent or other relative of the deceased. 48% of the time, the person who was murdered, the parent or another relative owned the gun that they were killed with. So, when you think about gang-related shootings, or, some of the shootings that have been happening all around us in town, you might think, well, that doesn't make any sense that they were killed with the victim's parents' weapon. No, not if it was a drive-by shooting and it was gang-related. But what about the kids, like in this picture, who are killed accidentally with a gun? The parents leave loaded weapons laying around. Kids are like cats. They're attracted to things that are shiny. It happens. 11% with a shotgun, only 4% with the hunting rifle. All right, is that enough statistics yet? I don't know. It's a little depressing. And y'all, pause this video whenever you need to and take a break. If we were in class, it would probably be time for a potty break. So, racial disparities in mortality. It's not necessarily our role in this class to try to figure out why the disparities exist. It's our role in this class to acknowledge that they exist and the impact that those disparities have on healthcare for children. In Louisiana, Black infants are more than twice as likely to die as white infants, while Black children are almost twice as likely to die as white children. And let me remind you that you are entering the healthcare field where we try to save lives and prevent death. When we look at disparities, we have to also look at poverty. There are things like priorities um, that are going to be different. Someone who suffers certain from different levels of poverty is going to list their priorities differently than you or I might. They have to prioritize basic needs, and their list of basic needs look different than someone who is not suffering from poverty. They tend to have older vehicles, and the city doesn't take care of the street lights maybe in certain areas or certain roadways. There tends to be buildings that are crumbling or dilapidated, and crime goes with all of that. So low socioeconomic status is directly correlated with injury-related child fatality. And if you look at these different things that are listed on the slide and start to make this make sense. Families experiencing poverty are more likely to live in economically disadvantaged communities that have a lack of resources and infrastructure, contributing to unsafe conditions. Those basic needs I was talking about, such as housing, food, and transportation, that stuff has to, we got to buy food before we worry about buying a car seat. Certain safety equipment, child passenger safety seats, bicycle helmets, all those things are expensive if communities do not have access to the free or low cost items. And they do, our community does offer these things, but we have to educate. We have to educate these teenage moms or moms that are overwhelmed that aren't teenaged or whatever it may be. We have to educate, and we have to provide a way for them to access this equipment that is available to them. As far as swimming pools go, these poorer neighborhoods may not have access to a free swimming pool with swimming lessons and lifeguards and proper supervision. There are drainage canals that fill with water and sweep away children, dilapidated buildings. There's not protection around these drainage canals like there should be. The poorly lit, poorly cared for roads. Cops don't even want to go in some of these neighborhoods to enforce safety rules, high rates of violent crime, all of that. Just, I don't need to preach at you about this. It's all around us. But I could preach at you about this. Instead of getting in those political conversations with your families about, we need to move out of Shreveport and this place is just going down, I'm trying not to say curse words. This place is just going to pot, we need to get out of here. And this is such a bad neighborhood. And there's so many, another shooting in Shreveport. Oh, stop and think about the elementary school across the street from where that shooting happened. Drive down Hearn Avenue and watch the children crossing the street where the shooting happened, just to, walking back and forth to school. Think about the kids. They didn't choose to live there. They get sick. They get sore throats and tummy aches. They, we're we're the ones that have to say every child deserves to have health care. Every child has a mother or a father or a grandparent or aunt or somebody that they love. For me to get health care to a child in my town, I have to break down barriers and I have to reach out to that caregiver. I have to find out what they need, and I have to be willing to make that phone call, to set them up, to do whatever I need to do to get them what they need for the benefit of the child. That's why we're talking about what we're talking about. Addressing structural and socioeconomic inequalities at a community and institutional level will help reduce child fatalities. We can have all the programs in the world, and we can have them at Safety Town, and we can invite Channel 3 out to record what a good job we're doing. But if we didn't reach out to those communities beforehand and make sure they knew about the service we were providing and make sure they had a way to get there, then what good did we do? So yes, the programs need to be developed, but we are the educators that come in touch with these families. We have to take advantage of every second that we have with these caregivers to make sure they don't fall through the cracks. Because whether or not you like the parents or not, or you approve of their style, it's not about you and it's not about them, it's about the kids. All right. Man, it just gets better and better. This is the most depressing class that we'll ever have. I promise you it will get better. Next week will be a little more uplifting. I'll try to have some humor in that one, but it's just hard to have a lot of humor with these topics. So there are different topics that we need to look at when we talk about bioethics. There's the right of the parents, the rights of the children, religious issues, consent issues, genetic testing issues. So I don't know if any of you have ever given birth to a premature baby. If you have, then I hope your baby did well. If not, I apologize for bringing this up. But it is something that we are faced with almost daily on the pediatric floor, because these babies survive a lot more than they once did, and they go home. They tend to get sick more often, and when they get admitted to the hospital, they're on the pediatric floor. And if we don't understand where they came from a prematurity standpoint, then we won't understand the complications that they're having. This baby is a 24-weeker. This baby is at risk of severe brain damage, heart failure, intestinal necrosis, blindness, and cerebral palsy. So yes, it's a miracle that this baby was born and is alive, but this baby has a solid 3 months of growing to do in an environment that it shouldn't be in yet, and so many complications can happen. All of the above can happen. Sometimes the babies have no complications and they go home and they die 2 weeks later from a cold, usually RSV. So when I started my career, um, I was in NICU for a year and a half before I switched to the pediatric ICU. And the ethical dilemmas for a 20-year-old girl who had no children of her own, um, it was truly overwhelming. Not so much at the time because I just went with it, but looking back, it haunts me, and there are just things that I'll never forget. Just like there are traumatic things in the pediatric ICU, of course, but something about NI is different. Here we have a male infant that was born this morning. He is 27 weeks gestation. He was born via emergency C-section, and the parents have just told you that they would like to withdraw life-sustaining medical treatment, including mechanical ventilation, IV nutrition, and IV hydration. And they state that they do not want to care for a handicapped child. So that is a dilemma that I have never crossed in the NICU. But the more people learn about the complications of having a premature baby and the likelihood that their child will suffer from some degree of cerebral palsy, among other things, I guess I could see someone saying this, but 27 weeks, I mean, but what do you do? Do the parents have the right to withdraw support? Something that I ran across more often was, do the parents have the right not to withdraw support? Do the parents have the right to force us to keep this baby alive that is just suffering, that we know will not survive, but we can't stop treating them legally unless the parents, withdraw life support? So, for example, I'll say this. Picture this, based on a true story. It's the middle of the night. Girl comes in through the emergency room. Her stomach hurts. All of a sudden, a baby pops out. She gives birth. She didn't know she was pregnant. Maybe she did and she's lying. No prenatal care. No idea how far along she is. As the resident that was on call realizes that she's about to give birth, she prepares the mother. Your baby's probably not going to make it. It's probably very premature. The baby pops out. They set the baby, or the fetus, no, it's a baby at this point. They set the baby to the side thinking it didn't make it, going to focus on mom. As the nurse goes to wrap up the baby, she hears a cry, a faint squeak. Everything stops. The resident has no choice. When there is a sign of life, the resident is forced to intubate the baby and rush it upstairs to the NICU. We guess that the baby is about 19 or 20 weeks, maybe 22. Just really have no idea. We told the mother the baby was not going to live. The baby did live. The baby's on the ventilator and maxed out on every type of life support. It is obvious to everyone involved this child will not survive, and we are prolonging the inevitable. This is as the days pass, of course. By this time, the baby's white skin has basically turned black. We can't reposition the infant because of seizure activity and just extreme instability. Because the skin is so translucent, we have to keep the humidity so high that when we attempted to roll the baby, there was mold growing on the back, the infant's skin. When someone would walk past the warmer and that change in the light, the shadow of the light would change, the baby would have a seizure. We couldn't stop the oscillator, which is a loud ventilator, to assess the infant because it would crash. I mean, there was nothing. It was awful. And the family would come in and want to hold the baby's hand and, just ooh and ah. And I'm thinking, what do you see? Because it's not what I see. But then again, I'm not the mother who was told, your baby's going to die. Oh, wait, your baby lived. Miracle number 1 has already happened. Are they supposed to not pray for miracle number 2 and just give up on their baby? I see both sides. I see both sides. So that's the kind of ethical dilemma that I remember more than anything from the NICU was, whose decision is it? Because, yeah, there have been 23 weekers that made it through and are probably sitting in our class today. Wendy Wood was our SNA president 1 or 2 semesters ago, and she was a 23-weeker. And she brought a book of all her pictures of when she was in NI. And, she has kids of her own now and has graduated nursing school. So I don't have the answer. The child has a right to life, which includes a right to treatment that has a reasonable chance of resulting in a significant extension of life. She also has a right to mercy, here defined as the right not to be made to experience unnecessary suffering. And that comes from the American Academy of Pediatrics. So, yes, the child has the right to life, but she also has the right to mercy. Parents are generally accorded the right to make medical decisions on the child's behalf. Parental authority, although widely accepted, is not absolute. As expressed by the U.S. Supreme Court, parents are free to become martyrs themselves, but it does not follow that they are free in identical circumstances to make martyrs of their children before they have reached the age of full and legal discretion when they can make that choice for themselves. And that's from the Supreme Court. Another dilemma. A 4-year-old presents to the emergency department with a 3-centimeter laceration sustained while walking in a friend's backyard. The wound is dirty. Mom agrees to have the wound irrigated and sutured. She believes in naturopathy and will not permit antibiotics or immunizations. The child has not had a tetanus shot. What do you do? Do you call CPS? The kid's fine. The kid looks fine. He looks happy. He's well adjusted. He looks well nourished. He's in play clothes. The mother seems fine. I mean, everything is perfectly normal. In fact, they seem kind of well-to-do. She's one of those moms. She's probably from California. I'm just joking. Not really, but I'm being sarcastic, but you know, I'm all about natural healing, but maybe the mother needs to see a picture of something called the 7-day death and what that does, what tetanus does to the body when, anyway, I won't get off on that sermon until we do our infectious disease lesson. But who has the right to make the decision for this kid in this situation? Now you're caring for a kid with asthma. Mom brings him in because he's wheezing. Parents are divorced. He was with his father over the weekend, and he now has a cough and a cold and some wheezing. The mother is convinced he is worse because dad is a smoker and always smokes around him. She accuses the father in front of the child and wants your help to get sole custody. So mom and dad are both standing there, even though they're divorced. They both care about their kid. Dad hasn't kicked the cigarettes to the curb, smokes around the kid that has asthma. Now, I want to smack dad because I know you like to smoke, but you cannot smoke around your child that has asthma, sensitive to your cigarette smoke. It's bad enough to put him in the hospital and possibly kill him. You go smoke in another room or outside. Even the smell of cigarette smoke on your clothes can trigger an asthma attack. I'm not judging you for smoking, but I'm judging you for feeding that smoke to your kid with asthma. And I will educate him aggressively. I will not try to take him away from his father and give sole custody to the mother. This is no reason to call child protection. The ethical dilemma here is that mom's put you in the middle. And how do you handle the situation? If you upset the parents, the child suffers. If you allow the parents to argue and call each other names in front of the child suffers. On the pediatric floor, that is not tolerated. If they will not leave when asked by the nurse, if the parents won't separate or the aggressive parent won't leave when asked, we will not hesitate to call security and have that parent removed. Simply because they are upsetting the child. It is not tolerated. A 4-year-old boy suffered a traumatic brain injury from a motor vehicle accident. It's been 6 months. He has been diagnosed as being in a permanent vegetative state. He's had multiple episodes of pneumonia. His lung function has deteriorated to the point that he is now dependent on mechanical ventilation. His parents provide the vent treatment from home, but every now and then he has to come back in the hospital with pneumonia. The physicians believe that continuing the ventilator is futile. What that means is he's not brain dead, but his brain is so damaged that he's what's called a vegetable. And it's been 6 months and he hasn't woken up. And he probably won't ever. He can't even maintain his respiratory function on his own because of the brain damage. So he gets sick a lot. If we did not put him on a ventilator, then nature could take its course, and sooner rather than later, one of the infections most likely would cause his death. But the parents are fighting that and prolonging his life with the ventilator. Do they have the right to keep him alive on the ventilator? He is not brain dead. He is simply very brain damaged. But his body is deteriorating. Do they have the right to keep him alive on a ventilator? This 11-year-old has been declared brain dead. The parents do not want to withdraw support. Currently, he's on IV nutrition, IV hydration, and the ventilator. The parents want a feeding tube placed and a tracheostomy for permanent vent support. The physicians believe this treatment is futile and refuse to provide it. He's brain dead. That means there is no flow of blood to the brain stem or the brain. In brain dead children, laws in every state allow the physician to forego life-sustaining medical treatment in individuals who are determined brain dead regardless of age. There have been cases in which parents have protested the removal of life support and prevailed, but these are rare. In most cases of disagreement, the child's respiratory and circulatory systems fail before the decision is made. Now, let me go back now that I've read that. When you are declared brain dead, extensive testing has been done, especially for a pediatric patient, and by two physicians, and usually they encourage the parents to witness some of the test to ensure that they are all on the same page, that this child's brain is no longer functioning. When the doctor declares the child brain dead, and that is documented in the chart, that is the legal time of death in the state of Louisiana. Even though their heart is still beating and they're on the ventilator and their skin is pink and warm and all of that, it is only because of artificial support. The body's state as such can only last that way for so long when you're brain dead. And that is what this statement means when it says, in most cases of disagreement, the respiratory and circulatory systems fail before the courts even just, made a decision. After a certain amount of time, if you don't withdraw life support in a brain dead situation, the neurons will literally start to degenerate, and the fingers will start to twitch, and the parents will think, oh, they squeezed my finger, and it's like, no, they're just degenerating. And you just can't. It's a sad thing to witness. But if the patient is in a vegetative state or a very minimally conscious state, then they're not dead. So yeah, the parents have the right to make decisions and keep them on the vent as long as they want to keep them on the vent. They have to take them home that way. A few states will allow physicians to override the parents if the physician determines that further treatment is futile. Usually it's more of just a conversation that happens, and the physicians encourage or just educate, if they feel that the child is suffering from repeated infections. And but there's only so much we can do. This is an example of one of the tests that we can perform. It's called a brain flow study. We go to nuclear imaging, and you can inject the dye. And this is a picture that no one can dispute, and including the parents, when you see that the blood flow literally stops and there's no flow to the brain. On page 15, there's some talk about organ donation and organ transplants. The cost of one organ transplant would pay for the prenatal care of many low-income mothers, possibly preventing the births of low birth weight infants who may suffer disability throughout life. So that statement can be found on page 15. Without having my book right in front of me, is that trying to show us an argument for or against organ donation? I think it's getting too late in the evening and my brain cells aren't working good anymore. But I'll tell you this. No one likes to think about having to donate the organs of their loved one. And even if you could think about it, if in 5 minutes you got a knock on your door saying that your husband or wife or son or daughter had been in a car accident, and by 15 minutes later you're at Ochsner in the ER and they tell you your kid or your wife or husband probably isn't going to make it, and they have someone that would like to talk to you about donating their organs, you would be in a state of shock. You would be angry. You would be, I don't even have a word for what you would be. But it is not going to be your best moment when you can sit down and logically think about donating organs. This is a conversation that needs to happen, again, starting with kids in the middle school, elementary school, especially high school. Everybody knows somebody that was killed while they were in high school. These are conversations that need to take place beforehand. There, on the other side of that token, there are families all over the world, all over this state, in our parish, that are waiting to get the phone call that they have an organ for their kid, for their son, for their daughter, for their wife, for their husband. Where do you think they're going to get those organs from? You are 6 times more likely to need a transplant than be a donor. Your organs can go in the trash, or they can save a life. But again, it's an ethical dilemma, because everyone has the right to their own opinion. And if they say no, absolutely not, you have to walk away and leave it alone. As a nurse, you're not the one that brings it up. It's kind of like against the law for you to bring it up. But if they bring it up, you're allowed to discuss it with them. Once the doctor has declared them brain dead, there is a list of steps that we take when we know that a patient is a potential donor. When things aren't looking good, nurses have steps that they're supposed to take to notify LOPA, the Louisiana Organ Procurement Agency, that we have a possible donor. They get someone to the hospital as soon as possible, and they kind of just float around like buzzards. The parents don't know who they are, but they're there, and they're waiting to get the go-ahead from the physician. And as soon as the physician declares them brain dead, a LOPA representative will be the one to approach the family, because they have been trained on how to do that appropriately. The nurse is usually present along with the doctor and the team taking care of that child. After that, the family will most likely, if they're considering it, have questions for you, and you are welcome to be part of the conversation. But it's not our job to pressure them one way or other. And it makes you sick. It might make you sick. It makes me sick when they say no, and I have to smile and give them a hug and say, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. I understand this is a hard time, da, da, da. You know, and you know that there was someone out there that so desperately needed those organs. But then on the other hand, I think, what if it was my kid? And I had to, and I've seen too much. I know what they do when they harvest organs. And I mean, I have to remember that if it was my child is no longer present according to my beliefs. It is only the shell, the body, and that my child is not hurting and is safe and is with Jesus according to my beliefs. But not everyone shares my beliefs. So it's a really touchy situation, and I hope I'm never in that situation, and I hope none of you are either. Here's a picture of a baby who was the recipient of 5 organs. And then the last thing I wanted to mention as far as biotics is prenatal genetic screening and other types of genetic testing that we can do. So we can test for things like, you know, Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, MD, sickle cell. So what's the ethical dilemma? Do I want to know? What am I going to do about it if I do know? If I felt like my child was predisposed to cystic fibrosis, I might want to know. So, or if I was an older mom and I felt like the chances were high, I might want to know if my baby was going to have Down syndrome, just so I could mentally prepare myself to take care of that infant, not so that I could abort the infant. But some people might choose to have an abortion, and that's where the ethical dilemma comes in. All right. Informed consent. Guys, I know this recording is getting pretty long, so I'm going to actually stop the recording here with slide 40, informed consent, and I'm going to start the upload, and then I will finish recording. I'll pick up here and just start a new recording and get that one uploaded too. So I'll title this one as part 1, and then I'll get part 2 up tomorrow.